Hey there my fellow witches, welcome to the Magical Den channel. If you are a beginner and stepping into the path of paganism, Wicca or witchcraft, or you're simply being drawn down this path, then you have made it to the right channel where you will find helpful knowledge about the craft, its rituals, tips and tricks. In today's video we will be discussing covens in the Wicca lifestyle. An introduction to covens. Because covens seem to be the most complex of the many ways that Wiccans practice, this is a good time to look deeper into these rather secretive groups. Yes, covens are still usually secretive, both in the spirit of tradition and as a way to protect the energy and activity in their circles from interference from the outside world. So what exactly is a coven? What do its members do? How do covens work, and why do so many people gravitate towards them? Is it wise to join a coven, and if you do, what are the benefits and potential pitfalls of doing so? These are all good questions. In this video, I'll be trying to answer them. Spiritual community and treasure trove of knowledge. While the solitary and/or eclectic path has plenty of appeal, many people who are new to Wicca do seem inexplicably called to join a coven. So what is the pull? Many feel that because the practice of gathering together for magical purposes was exercised back as far as ancient times, that this is the right way to observe such traditions. Others feel that joining a coven is an important part of becoming Wiccan and that the only way to become a Wiccan is through the most traditional of means possible. Furthermore, there are those who feel that they could benefit greatly from the knowledge and spiritual teachings of others and wish to congregate for the purpose of learning. Each of these is a very valid reason for wishing to join and regularly attend the proceedings of a coven. You might say that traditionalism and the conservation of old ways is held near and dear in terms of practicing most, if not all, religions. Even the Roman Catholic Church has a hierarchical structure and a priesthood with an air of exclusivity. Convents are also much like covens, and some may even find it interesting that the two words have somewhat related etymologies. Buddhist monks gather for spiritual reasons and, like nuns, live together and dedicate their entire existence to learning the spiritual teachings of their chosen path. Then there are gurus and swamis, the ancient druids, and a litany of many more spiritual societies. Those practicing modern paganism might consider the druids to be a great example of a type of coven before its time, given how much work was put into developing magical abilities, healing, and studying the mysteries hidden from plain view. Druids were not alone, however. Shamans, herbalists, Native Americans, ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and many more had fraternal orders that allowed for the working of magic as well as healing and worship of the divine. Because we all want to be as close to our roots as possible, it makes perfect sense for Wiccans to seek to join covens in order to preserve a tradition that could very well be dying out due to the influx of solitary practitioners, eclectic Wiccans, and generalized circles popping up all over the place. Covens do at times feel threatened by the impending extinction of their lines. Fortunately, there are plenty of newcomers to Wicca who are inclined to be purists when it comes to their religion. It's completely natural to want to fully immerse yourself in a new spiritual leaning. It's the only way for some, and this means seeking out a coven that is accepting new members and possibly even going through the same initiation rituals Gerald Gardner first introduced all those decades ago. Purists, as we all know, are going to be driven in their purpose, learning as many of the old ways as possible because their general attitude is that joining a coven is the only right way to become Wiccan and sustain a true Wiccan path. We know that this isn't true anymore, but if seeking out and joining a coven is what makes you feel the most at home in the faith, by all means do so. After all, there is no right or wrong way to follow this deeply spiritual and earth-attuned path. Finally, we know that covens are treasure troves of information on the craft and its tenets. Their members join together and exchange knowledge, putting it all into practice, learning exponentially as the group gets older and wiser as a whole. Those looking to be formally initiated into covens may be enticed by the prospect of benefiting from this knowledge in their own solo work, in addition to their participation in the group. While some see this as a selfish desire for personal gain, this is actually one of the reasons that covens bring in new members, to pass on the information and teachings they possess. If the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn had never adopted Aleister Crowley into their circle, Gerald Gardner wouldn't have had so much magical inspiration and information to work with himself. The need to learn is within all of us, and that is never a selfish pursuit, so if this is your aim, you have arrived at the right place by looking into covens and what they do. All of these are very good reasons to research covens and become a member of one. Without these motives, we wouldn't have these special spiritual societies in this day and age, and thus, this unique aspect of the faith would wither away into the past. The coven life, because of the tradition of secrecy in most covens, and because each coven is unique, it's a bit difficult to get into specific detail about what it's like to belong to one. But by now, you at least know that a coven isn't just a bunch of cackling hags around a bubbling cauldron. A coven is a community of Wiccans who are dedicated to the craft and its teachings, as well as, usually, a specific tradition of it. These special groups are sometimes quite old, with lineage dating back as far as the 1960s, but there are always new groups developing as well, who carry on the old traditions while perhaps adding some of their own. Covens perform a lot of great rituals, sabbats, and healing circles. They also do hand fastings, naming ceremonies, and much more. They can heal people, hold prayer circles, and use their knowledge to spread love and light in the world around them. Traditional coven structures. The coven is traditionally made up of anywhere from 9 to 13 members, but in modern times, some groups like to allow larger numbers in order to include family members. Others keep their group smaller, with as few as 3 members, for a more intimate circle. There is usually a hierarchical structure to traditional covens. Generally, there are degrees, or ranks, that initiates can make their way through by studying and learning from elders in the craft. There are typically 3 different degrees, with the first being the most basic requirement for initiation. The second and third degrees permit more responsibility and activity within the coven leadership. The coven leader, or leaders, will make larger decisions affecting the coven and will preside over important rituals. Typically, a more traditional coven will have 1 or 2 leaders. If there is only one, it will be a female who is referred to as the high priestess. The high priestess is considered to be the center of all rituals and magic. She makes the coven's bigger decisions and evaluates prospective members to ensure that they are ready to enter initiation. She also decides whether members who want to pursue initiation into a higher degree are ready to do so. If there is a second leader, it will be a male who is referred to as the high priest. Traditionally, the high priest was subordinate to the high priestess, and this is still true in some covens, but many, even those who descend from the original Gardnerian and Alexandrian traditions, have opted for a more equal sharing of power between their leaders. The high priest and priestess are highly knowledgeable in the craft and may be elders in the group. They may even have come up through the ranks of the coven themselves, if the coven has been around long enough, finally reaching the top level of leadership. Just beneath the high priest and priestess are the members of the inner court. The inner court is the group of witches who have completed at least the second degrees of initiation and have proven themselves wholly proficient in both their ritual and spell work. The third degree practitioners are the ones who are most well-versed and are being positioned to start and manage a coven of their own, if they desire to do so. These witches are closest to the leaders and are often present in the sacred circle during specific rituals and magic undertakings. They also help to teach the people in the coven's outer circle who are seeking first-degree initiation. Second-degree initiates are at a level where they are allowed to be a part of the circle and are deepening their knowledge of the coven's ritual work while helping with the non-initiates. They are taught by the priestess and third-degree members at an accelerated rate, illustrating the importance of their role in the coven. Some second-degree witches will even have the ability to train first degrees if they have proven themselves ready. This could also indicate a second-degree witch who is ready for initiation into the third degree. Speaking of this type of advancement, it's useful to note that one of the big taboos in many covens with hierarchies is when a second-degree initiate asks to be moved up to the final level, rather than being invited. This major faux pas may even see you removed from the coven if the priestess is upset enough, although it would be hard to imagine. It does happen. Hierarchy can have interesting effects on the human ego. The first-degree witches are those who have just been initiated into the craft. They are in a rank of their own, separate from both the outer and inner circles. First-degree practitioners have shown that they are pure in intention, that they have the desire and passion to learn, and have a basic understanding of magic and rituals. This level of initiation allows members to learn how to cast a circle in their particular coven, undergoing training from those in the higher ranks. Once they have proven themselves proficient and dedicated, they may be initiated into the second degree, but as with all levels, only with the priestess's blessing. The outer circle is occupied by those who would like to be initiated into the coven. They are not present for everything that the coven does, often being closed out of more important or sacred rituals and esbats. This is to protect the coven from those with ill intentions or those who are simply not ready to begin progressing on their path. In the outer circle, one is still in the process of becoming educated and proving of oneself to the coven and its leader. They are not always even considered to be members until they are initiated into the first degree, and they cannot enter the first degree unless the higher ranks approve. Looking at this rigid structure, one can see how serious and devout coven members must be to become a part of the main circle. It may seem rather elaborate, but this is the traditional structure that covens followed back in the early days of Wicca. There are many groups that still observe this hierarchy today, although others have simplified things a bit. It all depends on the coven's tradition and the preferences of the coveners. Newer adaptations, in terms of equality and views of power structures, the world has come a long way since the mid-1950s when the traditional coven structure was ingrained into modern witchcraft. In the decades since, and particularly in the 21st century, many Wiccans have adapted the old rules to make them more practical and appropriate to their own experience of society. For example, the traditional supremacy of the high priestess was meant, in part, to balance out the gender inequalities of British society in the middle of the last century. While it can be argued that the world still has a long way to go toward achieving total equality, many contemporary Wiccans have come to see this aspect of the traditional coven structure as unnecessary and even cumbersome. Therefore, the high priestess and high priest may share power equally in many modern-day covens. Another variation is the complete and total abolishing of degrees. This makes for fewer issues among the ranks because, well, there are none. It also prevents dissent that can arise from feeling pinned under such a limiting authority figure of sorts. Without degrees, people feel more at ease to practice and learn at their own pace instead of trying to cram 3 centuries worth of information into their brains in order to make the next rank. Moreover, some covens do not allow for an outer circle. The high priestess may interview prospective members or the coven may advertise when it is open to new initiates, closing itself off from new memberships for a large majority of the time. This keeps all of the coven's proceedings from being seen by people who might decide not to join, but will still know about, and might even go around speaking of, details relating to the coven's work. Another system that people find preferable over the traditional coven structure is an electoral system, whereby the high priest and priestess are voted on by the members of the coven. This can be tricky, depending on the maturity level of all the egos involved, because influence may have nothing to do with who is most deserving or learned. However, when members are being responsible and letting divine forces inform their decisions, the results can be very satisfying. As you can see, there are several different possibilities for how a given coven is structured and operated. The extent to which hierarchy is observed is one of the things you'll want to inquire about when looking into joining a coven. You'll also want to know about the general rules and requirements. It tends to go without saying that coven members are expected to attend every meeting and every ritual. They may also be restricted to practicing magic within the coven circle alone, prohibited from doing their own solo work until initiated into a higher level. Each group will conduct all of its rituals in a specific way that is traditional to their circle, and some will only allow one copy of the coven's Book of Shadows to exist. Of course, some covens are much more rule-oriented than others, but because all are closed to the public, there is no way of knowing just how strict a given coven may be until you approach them with your interest in joining. Before you start knocking on doors, however, it's useful to take a closer look at the benefits and potential drawbacks of choosing this path of Wiccan practice. The pros and cons of covens. As with any decision involving spirituality, the choice of whether or not to join a coven should not be taken lightly. Coven membership is a serious commitment, and it requires careful consideration. You will have to be honest with yourself about whether you are willing to go the distance. Even if it sounds like a very exciting idea at first, it is important to evaluate each potential advantage and each possible drawback before you can be certain whether coven life is for you. The benefits of joining a coven. Becoming a member of a coven can bring many blessings that may end up being very important to your spiritual path. Perhaps the main benefit of joining a coven is the obvious acceleration in learning. You will be training yourself in Wicca actively, learning each and every skill the coven views as essential. In addition, a number of knowledgeable members with unique perspectives on the craft will be taking you under their wing, which means you have the potential to learn a very diverse skill set. Many coven members like the sense of community that a coven can provide. It gives them a feeling of belonging in a world that isn't entirely open to the tenets of Wicca. As just about anyone in the faith can tell you, it can feel a tad lonely to be the only Wiccan in a room of Christians and atheists. Being a part of a coven gives Wiccan practitioners something to belong to and somewhere to practice their religion with others who share a common spiritual orientation. This sense of community is really no different from what Christians, Muslims, and Jews enjoy in their own congregations. Some hold the view that the magic worked as part of a coven is much more powerful than that of a solitary practitioner. This is why people so often form circles for doing rituals and spell work. This may or may not be true, depending on how intent and focused the group is and whether the work is really done correctly. If you consider the potential power of the raising of energy in covens, it could be really quite spectacular, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the energy raised by a solitary witch is any less authentic. Others like to be led by someone with a vast amount of wisdom and find that being a part of a coven allows them to do so freely without having to do the heavy thinking for the group. There is also a lesson in commitment here that people enjoy learning. This is something that covens teach through mandatory attendance, a vow of secrecy, and a hierarchical structure to make one's way up through. The drawbacks of working in a coven. Those who have tried covens and found it not to be their best option have tended to feel a lack of spiritual freedom. Some would even go far enough to call it dogma. Being a part of a coven can mean following a very rigid system where everything must be done a certain way. Its members can also be less than forgiving of those who break any of the rules, as they are seen to be going against the coven and betraying trust. So you may have to weigh the good of the group against your own personal preferences at times, and not all aspiring Wiccans are quite cut out for this way of being. Some covens don't actually allow many, or any, of their members to progress beyond a specific degree, preventing them from being able to leave the group and start their own coven or even having an intimate part in rituals and spell work. In fact, certain covens don't allow for spellcasting outside of their circle, figuratively and spiritually cutting members off at the knees and keeping them at arm's length from the goddess and god. This is much like what cults and even some churches do to their followers and should be a red flag for anyone wishing to truly progress along their spiritual path. Because attendance is generally mandatory for anyone who is initiated into a coven, it can be difficult to wedge coven participation into one's lifestyle. Not everyone can commit to something that requires them to come out for every Sabbat, and spellcasting there is in a year, so it is best to consider this in terms of practicality. Can you attend every meeting a coven holds in addition to taking care of all of your other commitments? If not, you may need to reduce your other activities to create a less hectic life, which isn't a bad idea for anyone, really, or else stick to the solitary path. Another option is to join a circle, rather than a coven, as circles usually have less demanding requirements. Finally, some find it difficult to feel an intimate level of connection with their spell and ritual work if they are a part of a group, as they don't feel to be in the driver's seat of their own spiritual path. This is another potential reason to try a circle first, to see if you can work with others and still feel as connected and focused on the earth and your task. Some gentle words of caution: even though we live in a world where religion should be a safe thing to come together for, there are some unscrupulous people out there who will engage in unethical and even dangerous activities in the name of Wicca. Unfortunately, you do have to take some important precautions when it comes to looking into covens. If you are becoming a part of one and notice any of the following behaviors on the part of your would-be fellow coveners, you are strongly advised to leave the group immediately. Depending on the circumstances, you may even want to report certain activities to the police. Cult-like atmosphere or proceedings: if you find that the coven you have joined seems more interested in worshipping its leaders rather than the god and goddess, it might be time to go before you're trapped in something you cannot get out of. Cult leaders always start out appearing to be about a religion or spiritual path, but end up being about absolute control over their followers. Cults can be dangerous when people are brainwashed into doing risky and/or illegal things or giving up everything they have to a leader. Satanic and malevolent work: Wicca is a religion of threefold law, and there should never be a situation where a coven is doing a spell that will harm anyone or anything. The same goes for anything resembling devil worship and/or making sacrifices. If you witness anything like this, turn around and walk in the other direction. Covens that participate in these kinds of works are not Wiccan and can really destroy your life with their dark magic and poor reputations. While there are neo-pagan groups who worship a deity named Satan in a pre-biblical sense, Satanism is not Wicca and should not be confused with the goddess and god-worshipping path. Illegal activities and drug-taking: if you find yourself in the middle of a coven gathering where there is illegal activity happening, this is a good time to remove yourself from their company. Theft and vandalism are not a part of Wicca and go against its tenets, but unfortunately there are occasional miscreants who try to use the secrecy of coven work as a smokescreen to hide their juvenile antics. As for drug use, it isn't ever a good idea to take something that someone gives to you unless you know exactly what's in it and what it's for. Although some pagan and neo-pagan groups use entheogenic drugs to attain heightened states of consciousness, taking drugs is dangerous, not to mention illegal, and you never know what you could be in for once they kick in. Sexual assault: although many covens no longer operate in the nude or reenact the union of the god and goddess physically, some do, and so they often attract people with the wrong motives. It's also possible that the use of ritual nudity and/or ritual sex is kept secret from new members, who will find the coven very appealing until it starts to get weird. Never become or remain a part of a coven where this kind of stuff is taking place, and if you witness anything physical happening against anyone's will, report it to the police. These warnings may seem stern, but unfortunately they've been proven necessary through experience. They are not intended to scare you out of looking into initiation through a coven, however. Certainly, not every coven out there is a cult or a dangerous place to lure women and minors to. The incidents described above represent a very small minority. Nonetheless, it's always better to be safe than sorry, so keep your sixth sense primed for anything that seems off about a group you come into contact with. Thank you so much for listening. Always remember that knowledge is power. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you will be notified of the next upcoming video, and as always, brightest blessings to my fellow witches.